So women in some jobs were just paid less than the men were. And, you know, we accepted it and the men thought it made sense and on we went. We were paid less because we worked in professions that were called something different and therefore made less money. So for example, in Canada, janitors were all men. They made more money than cleaners, who were all women. And there are many examples of that in Canada, where just calling a job something made it more female and somehow justified, therefore, it wasn't worth as much as the male doing the same work. So eventually in Canada, we introduced laws for equal pay for equal work. Not exactly the same, but equal work. So there are also women getting paid less because they're working in jobs that aren't seen as having as much value to society. For a long time, nurses were being paid less than largely professions like outdoor workers, like road workers or ditch diggers. Which has more value to society? You can argue. But the nurses were not being paid as well. There were opportunities denied to women over the years to even be in certain professions. For example, in Canada, at one time, to be a police officer, you had to be 5 foot 10 inches tall or 180 centimeters tall. Well, I suggest that there aren't very many women in this room who are 180 centimeters tall. So none of you can be police officers, even though you might make a fantastic police officer. And police officers were paid very well back in the day. And it goes on and on and on. So there are many reasons why women, over the course of their careers, end up not being able to earn, not having the same earning power as men. Not to mention that we are the ones that have the children. So we have to take time often away from work to have the children. And over the course of our lives and careers, if you have more than 1 or 2 or 3 children, then ultimately the money that you've made over the course of your career is likely to have been impacted by that. Now, all of this is changing, I'm happy to say. Dramatically in my career, dramatically. When I joined the Foreign Service, it was in the late 1980s, about 6% of the senior sort of executive level were women. 6%. I only knew one. I knew no female ambassadors. There were some. I didn't know them. And it never occurred to me that I might be able to be one of them, because the model for me was male. So how have we progressed in the Foreign Service? Well, we've made lots of progress. However, much of it has been a result of very recent actions, recent as in the last decade, that have allowed us to move forward in terms of getting more women into positions as ambassadors. And I've had the privilege, this is my 3rd position as an ambassador, but I've been very lucky. And if I'm being brutally honest, I would say probably that first opportunity was because I had a male mentor. So there are opportunities, and in our service we have a wonderful opportunity now with our Prime Minister, who has made it very clear that he expects that there be 50% female ambassadors, as long as he's the Prime Minister. So this has made a huge difference. But I want to read to you today something that is from a large Western country that will remain nameless, developed country. It's a real memo, written in 1963, and it's talking about, do we think that women could be what are called trade commissioners? So these are the people in our embassies that deal with trade and economics. Could a woman do that job? And this is the memo, and it's a real memo. Well, it starts out saying, in countries where publicity is well developed, a relatively young, attractive woman could operate with some effectiveness in a subordinate capacity. So that's the beginning of this memo, and that's the best part of the memo. That's the best reason why maybe a woman could do the job. It goes on to say, oh, and if we had an important trade in women's clothing and accessories, then a woman might be able to promote those as effectively as a man. Just clothing and accessories, apparently, nothing else. And then it says, but even conceding those points, okay, so apparently those were the only two positive points for a woman being a trade commissioner, such an appointee would not stay young and attractive forever, and later on could well become a problem. So now we move to the reasons why it would be difficult for a woman. Well, it's difficult to think of them as trade commissioners, first, because they could not mix nearly as freely with businessmen as men do. So women wouldn't be able to mix with men. Well, they seem to do it in any other profession, but okay. It's extremely doubtful if a woman could, year after year, under a variety of conditions, stand the fairly severe strains and stresses, mentally and physically, which are part of the life of a trade commissioner. We are the sex that grows humans inside us, right? I think mentally and physically, we probably can withstand just about any stress and strain. But apparently in 1963, it wasn't believed that we possibly could do these jobs. A man normally has his household run efficiently by his wife, who also looks after much of his entertaining. A woman trade commissioner would have all this on top of her normal work. Well, actually, that one is true. However, we managed to do it anyway. If we engage single women graduates, so out of university, as trainees, most of them would probably marry within 5 years. So wouldn't the men also marry within 5 years? Not quite understanding that one. Except, in our foreign service, we made it even more difficult for women. Until 1974, we said, if a woman in the foreign service marries, she has to leave. Not the man, the woman has to leave. This one is my favorite. A spinster lady, so translating in the English term spinster, meaning an unmarried older woman, a spinster lady can, and very often does, turn into something of a battle axe with the passing years. A man usually mellows. Did you know that? So then, the last piece. A woman would take the place of a man and preclude us from giving experience to one male officer. And that comes down to what this memo is all about. Because yes, exactly, a woman would take the place of a man. Yes. She could marry at any time. We just randomly run off and get married and be lost to us. She could not be regarded as a long-term investment in the same sense as we regard a man. And it comes to the conclusion, and it says, it would seem that the noes have it. No female trade commissioners in the Foreign Service. 1963. It's not that long ago, actually. 1970s in Canada. If you marry, you have to leave. So the barriers that women in the past and women today face are significant. They've changed. They've become much more subtle, I think, in many ways in our country, but they still exist. The challenges are still there. But what I think is so wonderful to look back on and to think about and to be proud of is that in spite of all these efforts to stop the progress of women, to stop us from having opportunities, to stop us from having access to meaningful jobs, to stop us from finding our own happiness and our own ambition in life, we did it. You did it. We overcame those barriers. We went around the barriers. We snuck under the barriers. We jumped over the barriers. But we did it. And so all I would like to say to you today is to leave you with just a couple of thoughts and maybe some humor. In Canada, there was a mayor, a female mayor. She was the first female mayor of our capital city, Ottawa. Her name was Charlotte Whitten. And she was a very witty, tough woman. To become a female mayor in Canada at that time, this was back in the 60s and 70s, you had to be very tough, and she was. And she was famous for one of her quotes, in which she would say, for a woman, basically, I'm paraphrasing, for a woman to get half the credit of a man, she needs to be twice as smart and twice as good at what she does. And then she would finish the quote by saying, fortunately, that isn't so difficult. So I leave you hoping that you leave this conference with inspiration, with ideas, with creative energy. And I want you all to remember that I believe very strongly that dreams are actually a form of planning. So I encourage you to just get out there, keep dreaming, and believe that you can do whatever you feel you want to do. Thank you very much. Thank you.